I saw them haul Sarah into Devil's Canyon like she was a sack of grain. 5 riders with scarves over their faces, pushing hard through red dust while her cries bounced off the rock walls until they faded. I was watering my horse at Miller's Creek when the shots cracked from the Hendricks place. By the time I reached the ranch, smoke curled from the cabin and old Jim Hendricks lay face down in the yard with 3 holes in his back. Sarah was gone. The hoof marks said enough. They'd taken her alive. My fingers shook while I slid rounds into my rifle. Sarah Rise wasn't just another neighbor. She was the only soul in this hard land who ever looked at me like I was worth more than the price on my head. 3 months ago, I limped into Copper Ridge with a bullet in my shoulder and no money for a doctor. She washed the wound, fed me soup, and never once asked about the blood on my shirt. The sun was dropping, turning the canyon's mouth as black as a tomb. Any wise man would wait for daylight, maybe raise a posse. But I knew the kind of men I was dealing with, the kind who left bodies hacked up in shallow pits, and women found days later, if found at all. Sarah didn't have days, might not even have hours. I kept seeing her smile from last Sunday after church, the way her hand lingered when she passed me the hymnal. For the first time in my life, I'd started to imagine settling down, buying a patch of land, learning how to live without checking over my shoulder. Now her screams were burned into me, and those soft dreams felt like they belonged to some other fool. The canyon yawned ahead like the throat of hell. Somewhere in that maze of stone and shadow, 5 killers held the only woman who ever made me want to be better. They likely guessed no one would chase them into Devil's Canyon at night. Even in daylight, it's a death trap, tight passages, crumbling ledges, and a dozen ways to vanish. I checked my iron one last time and nudged my horse toward the dark. He sensed what waited and fought the reins, but I pushed him on. As we slipped into the shade, I heard something that froze my blood. Sarah's voice, faint but clear, calling my name from deep inside. I didn't know yet that following that voice would walk me into a snare 20 years in the making. The tracks in the soft dust told a story I didn't want to believe. 8 horses, not 5. More men were waiting inside, which meant this wasn't a quick robbery gone bad. It was planned. I trailed the sign deeper into those red walls, rearing over me like the ribs of a giant beast. Each hoof step echoed, bouncing back like whispers from the dead. Every shadow could hide a barrel, every boulder a lookout. A mile in, the trail forked 3 ways. I slid off and studied the ground by moonlight. The main group turned left toward the heart of the canyon, where the old Apache caves are. But 2 riders had cut right, and one of those mounts carried extra weight. My gut said they'd split on purpose, a decoy one way while a small pair took Sarah somewhere else. These weren't drifters chasing easy coin. They knew this ground, knew how to move, how to vanish. I thought of Marcus Cole and his crew, the ones terrorizing settlements from here to Silver Falls. Cole was clever enough to set this up and cruel enough to grab a woman just to watch a man break trying to save her. We had history. 5 years back, I put his brother under the dirt after a bank job spun sideways. A breeze stirred and brought the smell of wood smoke from up ahead. They'd made camp, bold enough to light a fire. That meant they weren't worried about pursuit, either because they had numbers or they'd picked a perfect killing ground. I tied my horse to a dead juniper and continued on foot, rifle ready. The smoke drifted from the left branch, the obvious route. My instincts screamed it was too tidy. Cole loves leaving breadcrumbs straight into a slaughter pen. 20 yards farther, I found what I needed, a shred of blue cloth snagged on a mesquite twig. Sarah wore a blue dress at church last Sunday, but this scrap was on the right path, not the smoky left. I crouched behind a boulder and tried to think like Cole. He'd expect me to follow the main sign and march into whatever ambush circled that campfire. He'd also figure I might smell the trick, which meant the right-hand trail could be another snare. The careful choice was to climb above, scout, and plan. But the clock was killing her. Every minute I took thinking was a minute in their hands. A woman's scream split the dark from the right path, sharp and desperate, then cut off clean. Something in it felt wrong. It sounded staged, like someone coached exactly when and how to cry. Sarah screams like a wildcat when she's truly scared. I heard it once when a rattler slipped into her chicken coop. This one was too perfect. I chose the middle track, the one with no prints at all. If Cole was playing games, he wouldn't expect me to ignore both obvious routes. The slot narrowed to a ledge barely wider than my boots. One bad step meant 60 feet down onto broken stone. Halfway along I found a thing that turned my stomach, a little rag doll, sun-beaten and torn, wedged in a crack. Below it, scratched into the rock with something sharp, were the letters MW, age 7. This wasn't Cole's first run through the canyon. The doll looked months old. Those letters were carved by a desperate hand, leaving a last sign. A little girl named MW had come this way. From the look of it, she never left. My grip tightened on the rifle as pieces slid into place. This wasn't robbery or simple payback. It was worse. Cole wasn't just stealing women. He was collecting them. And Devil's Canyon was his hunting ground. I pushed on until the ledge opened into a hidden pocket between walls. What I saw nearly made me slip. 3 wooden crosses jammed into the soil, each over a shallow grave. Fresh dirt on one, maybe a week old. Names and ages cut into the wood. Martha Walsh, 19. Rebecca Stone, 23. And the fresh mound, Maria Santos, 16. Cole wasn't just killing. He was curating a private graveyard. Sarah wasn't the first. If I didn't stop him tonight, she wouldn't be the last. Voices drifted up from below, men talking low and easy. I crawled to the edge and peered into a narrow valley I never knew was there. 3 campfires burned, and I counted at least a dozen men moving between them. Not just Cole's core gang, an army. What froze me wasn't the number. It was the sight at the center. A wooden cage with iron bars flashing in the firelight. Beside it sat another cage, and it wasn't empty. A woman with long dark hair lifted her head at nearby footsteps. When she looked up, my world tilted. It wasn't Sarah inside. It was Maria Santos, the same girl supposedly buried under that fresh cross. She was alive. Cole wasn't only killing, he was keeping some. I'd stood at Maria's funeral in Silver Falls just last week, watched her mother toss dirt onto a coffin I now knew was empty. There she sat breathing, thin and tired, locked up like she'd been there for months. Cole's game was bigger. Snatch women, fake their deaths, let families mourn, then hide them in this stone pit no one would ever search. I counted again, 15, maybe 16 men. They weren't scattered, they were placed. Sentries at every approach. Weapons cached where they could grab them fast. Escape lines mapped. Cole's years as a cavalry officer showed in the layout. But I didn't see Sarah, which meant she was in a tent or somewhere worse. Leaving Maria caged made my skin crawl, but a blind charge would get us all dead. I angled around the rim for a better look, and heard feet on rock behind me. I spun too late. 3 men boxed me in, guns leveled at my chest. Marcus said you come, the biggest one grinned, gold tooth flashing. Said you're too dumb and too soft on that Hendricks girl to stay away. They marched me down at gunpoint, and I saw Marcus Cole for the first time in 5 years. He'd aged rough, gray streaks, new scars, but his eyes still carried that cold, careful mind that made him dangerous even in uniform. Well, well, he said, standing by the fire. The famous bounty man walks right into my parlor. Tell me, friend, how's it feel to be the one hunted? I kept quiet, eyes drifting over rifles and positions. Maria watched from her cage, hope and fear fighting in her stare. Up close I could see the weeks on her, torn dress, hollow cheeks. You're wondering about my collection, Cole said, following my gaze. Army taught me something. Fear works, but hope works better. Keep 'em breathing, keep 'em hoping, and they'll do anything. He slid fingers along Maria's bars. Little Maria's been helpful, haven't you? Tell our guest what happens to girls who don't help. Her whisper barely carried. They get buried alive. Cole nodded. Smart girl. He tipped his head toward another tent. Miss Hendricks? Spirited. She'll settle once she sees what became of the last man who tried to play hero. He motioned, and 2 men dragged a body from behind the canvas. Even by firelight, I knew that pin star. Sheriff Tom Bradley from Copper Ridge, the one leading the search for Maria. But what iced my veins wasn't the corpse. It was what Cole drew from his coat, a folded letter with my name in handwriting I knew. Sarah had written to me. Somehow he'd taken the letter before I ever saw it. Cole opened it slow, savoring each rustle. "Listen, boys," he read loud enough for Maria to hear. "My dearest James, I know we haven't said it plain, but I believe God brought us together. If you're reading this, you've already decided I'm worth the risk." My gut twisted. Sarah had been ready to give me her whole heart, and Cole snatched that moment. How did he get it? She was meant to give it to me yesterday evening. "Quite the poet, your Sarah," Cole said with fake sweetness. "She goes on about a life together, children, a small farm, peace." He looked up, eyes cold. Touching. Almost makes a man believe in happy endings. He folded the paper away. Of course, she wrote this 3 days ago, before she learned what her dear daddy really was. The words hit like a punch. "What are you saying?" His grin widened. "You don't know? About Jim Rise and our little deal? About him feeding me, which ranches to hit, which families at cash." I replayed the yard at the Hendricks place. Jim face down, hands clean, no scrapes from fighting back. Something had been off. "Jim Rise was my inside man 2 full years, Cole said. Told me everything about every homestead within 50 miles. I left his place alone and split the haul even." Maria's voice rose from the cage, steadier. "He's lying. Sarah found out about her father 3 days back. That's why she's really here." Cole slapped her through the bars. The crack sounded like a shot. Quiet. But the damage was done. Pieces clicked together and made a picture I hated. Sarah hadn't been dragged here. She walked in, likely trying to trade herself for the lives her father put in danger. "Where is she?" I asked. Cole pointed at the largest tent. "Your saint has been bargaining for the folks her daddy sold out. Quite the little martyr, offering herself for a pardon I never planned to give." Then he said the thing that froze me solid. "She still thinks you're coming to save her. Doesn't know you're already too late." The tent flap lifted and Sarah stepped out. But she wasn't the woman I remembered. Her blue dress was fresh, hair combed and pinned, and she moved like she belonged. When she saw me tied by the fire, she didn't look shocked or scared, only disappointed. "You shouldn't have come, James," she said, voice smooth and cool. "This was supposed to be simple and clean." My head spun. This was the woman who bandaged me and smiled at church. The one who made me believe I could be more than a hired gun. "Sarah, what is this?" She sat on a crate across from me, smoothing her skirt like we were taking tea, not sitting in a kidnapper's camp. "My father was weak," she said. "He took their coin, then kept records thinking they'd protect him if Marcus turned. Fool didn't see that keeping proof is a death warrant." Cole stood behind her, hand resting on her shoulder. "Sarah came with a plan," he said. "Clean up Daddy's mess, erase witnesses, help us expand. In return, we make sure her past disappears." I stared at the woman I thought I loved, searching for any trace of her. "The letter, you wrote it knowing I'd never read it." "I wrote it to make sure you came alone," she said. "Marcus needed you gone. Better folks remember you dying to save a good woman than remember the killer you are." "Tell him about the others," Maria cut in, voice sharp. "Tell him about Rebecca and Martha." For a blink, Sarah's perfect calm cracked. "Shut up." Maria pressed on. She picked them. She rode into town, befriended lonely girls, the ones with no family, and told Marcus where to find them. The full horror rolled over me. Sarah hadn't just turned on me. She'd scouted victims. Every name on those crosses, every vanished girl, Sarah marked them. "You're a monster," I whispered. She stepped close, crouched to meet my eyes. "I'm a survivor. My father's guilt was going to get us all killed. I did what it took." Her fingers touched my cheek, cold as riverstone. "I cared for you in my way. That's why I'll make this quick." But while she talked, I noticed what she missed. Maria working a shard of metal in the lock, grinding at rust. The old latch was nearly free. Sarah drew a tiny derringer from her pocket and pressed it to my temple. "Any last words for the man you thought you loved?" I met her eyes and said the only thing that mattered. Maria. Now. Maria exploded from the cage like a wildcat, 20 feet of desperate fury slamming into Sarah before anyone breathed. The derringer barked. The round sang past my ear and sparked off stone. Both women crashed into the dirt, clawing and rolling. Cole's men lunged for rifles but hesitated, afraid to shoot while Sarah wrestled in the middle. That half-second cost them. I dove behind a rock while they scrambled. Maria wrenched free, snatched a burning branch from a fire, and whipped it in a wide arc, flinging hot embers into the dry brush ringing the camp. In moments, flames licked up the canyon walls, sealing exits and turning the hideout into a furnace. Smoke thickened. Shouts tangled. I worked my hands loose from the rope, feeling skin peel. Cole bellowed orders, trying to form a bucket line, but the blaze ran faster than men could carry water. Sarah tore from Maria and reached for the derringer, but I was closer. My boot came down on her wrist, bone snapped like a twig. She screamed as the gun skittered into the dark. When she looked up, the mask was gone. No soft words, no kind eyes, just raw hate and the wild fear of a trapped thing. You don't know what you've done, she spat. This was bigger than Cole. There are people in every town from here to California, rich, powerful. You just wrecked their supply. They'll hunt you. Maria slid in beside me with Cole's rifle in her hands. She's lying about being forced. I heard her plan it with him. She liked picking the girls who'd suffer most. Fire chewed through tents. Half of Cole's men ran for the walls, abandoning their chief and his prize. Cole stood near the edge of camp, face set in rage and calculation, watching his empire burn. This isn't over, he shouted above the roar. I know who you are, bounty man. I know where you go when you pretend you're safe. He vanished into smoke, leaving Sarah to face what she'd built. She bolted, but Maria was ready. The rifle cracked. The canyon threw the sound back at us. Sarah's rise fell hard, finally paying for the lives she helped ruin. Heat slammed our faces. We had seconds. Maria grabbed a knife, sliced the cage key ring from A. Fallen guard, and tossed it to me. I kicked open the other empty cage so no one else would suffer there and grabbed a canteen. We ran for the narrow path I'd used to circle the rim. Sparks chased us. Ash stung our eyes. Behind, tents collapsed and iron bars glowed red. We climbed until the smoke thinned and the stars cut through again. At the top, we hunched behind a boulder, coughing and shaking. The canyon below burned like a forge. The 3 crosses I'd seen earlier were silhouettes in the red wash, one fresh mound now scorched black. You were at your own funeral, I said, handing Maria the canteen. She drank, voice rough. My mother buried an empty box. He told her it was what was left. She stared into the flames. I thought I'd die down there. Not tonight, I said. We moved along the ridge, staying low, listening for riders. From the far side of the fire, hooves pounded, the ones who escaped driving for open country. Cole would live. Men like him always find a crack to slip through. But his den was gone, his cages empty, his secrets cooked in their own smoke. At a broken juniper I'd used before, we found my horse trembling on the lead rope. I cut him free, threw Maria the reins, and we led him on foot until the air cleared. Dawn began to gray the eastern edge of the world. We put miles between us, and that blaze before we dared speak more than a few words. On a flat ledge, we stopped and wrapped our hands, tore strips for bandages, and counted what we had: 1 half-empty canteen, a rifle with a handful of rounds, my revolver with 4 shots, and a will to keep going. There will be others, Maria said, eyes hard. Cole said there were men in towns all the way west. He lied plenty tonight, I said. But that part, I believe. We started down the long trail toward Copper Ridge. Somewhere behind, the canyon still crackled and sighed. Vultures traced lazy circles in the warming sky. By noon we reached Miller's Creek. I washed soot from my face and watched black ribbons drift downstream. Maria sat on the bank, quiet. I should go home, she said at last. Tell my mother I'm not in the ground. She'll need time, I answered. but she'll be grateful for truth. Maria pushed hair from her eyes. And you? I stared at the water. Cole doesn't forget. He'll come for me after he finds more horses and new friends. You saved me, she said. And you saved the next girl who would have gone in that cage. I shook my head. We saved each other. We reached the Hendricks Ranch by late afternoon. The fire had burned itself out days earlier, leaving black timbers and a lean smell of loss. We found a shovel, said a few words over Jim Hendricks, and laid stones so coyotes wouldn't dig. There was no forgiveness in me for the lives he sold, but there was pity for a weak man who thought secrets could save him. We rode on at dusk and slept rough under a cottonwood, taking turns on watch. Coyotes yipped far off. The wind eased. In the dark, Maria whispered, "Do you think he really kept a list? Names of the men who paid him." If Sarah told it true, Jim kept records. Cole or Sarah likely have them, or had them. I pictured paper curling in the fire, ink going to smoke. Maybe the canyon burned the rest. Maybe, she said. But even ash leaves a stain. When the sun lifted, we pushed toward town. People stared when we rode in, at the soot, the blood, the hard miles written on us. I left Maria at the church steps with the preacher's wife, then went straight to the sheriff's office with Sheriff Bradley Starr wrapped in a bandana. I set it on the desk and told the deputy everything that wouldn't get Maria dragged into another cage. The deputy listened, jaw tight, hands shaking when he touched the badge. "We'll wire Silver Falls," he said. "We'll send riders east and west. If Cole's out there, we'll find him." "He'll find you first if you're careless," I warned. "He moves like a soldier." I stepped back into the street and looked toward the far blue line of hills, the direction Cole took when the fire chased him. He'd lived to try again. Men like that always do. But he'd lost his hole, his graves, and his partner with a pretty smile. Those things leave marks that don't fade. At sunset, I walked to the church. The bell was still. Maria stood in the doorway with her mother, both of them crying soft and holding tight. I tipped my hat and turned to go. "Where will you head?" Maria called. I looked east. Somewhere open. Somewhere quiet for a spell. She nodded like she understood. "Thank you," she said, "for not leaving me there." "Thank you," I said, "for lighting the fire." I saddled up at Miller's livery. Old Miller shook his head at the soot and the burned hair on my coat. "You look like you crawled out of the devil's stove," he muttered. "Feels about right," I said. He handed me a wrapped biscuit and a canteen. "Take 'em. Road's long." I rode at dusk, the world going purple. The desert wind tasted clean again. Behind me, Devil's Canyon still smoldered, thin smoke writing a hard truth across the sky. The woman I thought I loved was gone, by her choosing and by our hands. The man who built a kingdom of cages was running, and the girl the territory buried last week rode free under open sky. I don't know what tomorrow brings, maybe Cole's bullet, maybe a quiet day on some forgotten ridge. But as the stars came out and the land cooled, I felt lighter than I had in years. We had ripped the hinges off a door that should never have been closed. Whatever came next, I'd meet it head on. Because for the first time in a long time, I wasn't just running from my past. I was riding toward something like freedom.